We're at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York. We're about to head off to the concentration camps, or at least a couple of them in Europe. And it's not something I'm really looking forward to, but I know it's something we ought to do. So I want you to come along with me on this trip. Today's show is sobering, but necessary. Recently, I was shocked to learn that 22% of millennials didn't even know what the Holocaust was. And 2/3 said that they didn't even know what Auschwitz was. I also heard that people were minimizing or even denying the Holocaust. I started to pray about wanting to meet a survivor and tell their story. Not long after that prayer, I met Steen Metz, a man from Denmark who was arrested with his family as a boy and sent by cattle car to Terezin. In the last 2 episodes, you heard Steen's amazing story of survival. But his story inspired me to do what I had been meaning to do, but putting off, to go see a concentration camp for myself. So my wife Karen and I got on an airplane, landed in Prague, and began driving north to the very place that Steen lived through the horrors of man's depravity. We're driving on the road from Prague to Terezin. Prague is a beautiful city. Everyone says you've got to see Prague, and it's nice. And the countryside's beautiful. Agriculture, mountains in the distance, flowers as we drive by, beautiful poppies, and we even passed a beautiful lake. But among all this beauty, there's a dark past. And it's not the Czechs' fault, it's Hitler's and the Germans' fault, for they had one of their concentration camps here about an hour north of Prague called Terezin. The Germans called it Theresienstadt. And this is the destination of Steen Metz as a child. This is where they took him and his family. This is where his father died.
They spared some younger men, and they were very selfish in doing that because these young men could help them perform as slave laborers, and it cost him his life.
When we arrived at Theresienstadt, I saw flowers and fountains. Oh, I'm sure it was much different when Steen was here. And we felt the oppression of a very dark history. I couldn't stop thinking of the darkness of that boxcar that young Steen and his family were in.
But it's hard to imagine that we spent over 80 hours, more than 3 days, 3 nights, in complete darkness, complete uncertainty. We had no idea where we would end up. I can still see the frightened faces of many of the adults. And the adults, it was packed like sardines, so to speak. And the adults were either standing or sitting for more than 3 days and 3 nights. There were 4 children about my age, 8, 9 years old, and we were able to lie down. There was no food, no water, no chairs, no blankets, no lights. There were no bathroom facilities. The smell was getting worse and worse.
After those 3 days and 3 nights of darkness, the train stopped. They thought, finally, this nightmare is over. But in reality, it had only begun.
This really depicts Hitler's hatred of the Jews better than anything else. As soon as we arrived, we were ordered to empty our pockets. They took our money, they took whatever valuable we had. They went through our suitcase. And as cruel as they were, I still remember They were trying to get my mother's wedding ring off. They couldn't. So she was able to keep her wedding ring. And my oldest daughter has the ring today.
Terezin was built as a fort by a Habsburg emperor to protect Prague. It was used as a prison in World War I. Then in 1940, the Gestapo made Terezin into a Jewish ghetto and concentration camp. The fort and prison were never designed for the mass influx of Jews from Czechoslovakia, Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, and Steen's country, Denmark. You have a fort that was built for maybe 4,000 to 6,000 people, and there's now 60 to 80,000
yes.
living in this place.
It was very, very tight. They built huts. We slept in bunk beds. We basically were lying directly on wood. We had straw mattresses, but there was very little straw in the mattresses. At night, especially in the summer, there were bed bugs, there were fleas, there were lice. I would be scratching myself in the morning, during the night, not knowing exactly what happened. My mother tried to explain it, but when you're 8 or 9 years old, you still don't understand what happened.
Because of the extreme overcrowding and German brutality, living conditions were horrendous. As I walked through the shower rooms, bunk rooms, and prison cells, my heart ached for the helpless Jewish people, especially for the little ones like Steen, all while the Nazis were staging scenes to tell a different story. Healthy French Jewish children were brought into play on a brand new playground. A Jewish filmmaker was tasked to film these charades to falsely tell the world the Nazis were treating the Jews well. The Nazis were trying to solve what they call the Jewish problem, and they had the final solution, which was the extinction, the mass murder. But they're telling the world something different.
Absolutely.
That they were resettling you,
yes,
and giving you these nice places to live, and these children were brought in. And I believe you wrote that later those children, those French children, would have also been exterminated.
Yes, they were sent to extermination camp afterwards, probably Auschwitz. Would you believe the filmmaker, after he filmed for the Germans, he was sent to an extermination camp also.
On these tracks that I'm standing on, they would take cattle cars and fill them full of Jewish people, send them off to Auschwitz and other death camps, to put them into the gas chambers, to kill them by the millions.
There were 85,000 inmates from Theresienstadt, or 140,000 that were sent to extermination camps. I'm very fortunate to be here.
Here at InGrace, we love the Jewish people and Israel. When you support InGrace Ministries, together we can continue to tell their amazing story as God's earthly people. When you give to InGrace, let me thank you by sending you today's series about the Holocaust. And if you can give $40 or more, I'll send you all 4 of these impactful video series about Israel. I'm waiting to hear from you right now.
Call 800-78-GRACE or go online to ingrace.tv and receive this special offer. The number is 800-78-GRACE or visit ingrace.tv.
Why would God allow such a horrendous thing? Why would God allow such evil to happen in this world? Well, let me just say one thing. Let's never blame God for evil. Evil is our fault. Evil is the devil's fault. Many died, thousands died from overwork, abuse, malnutrition. And it's just horrible to see. Horrible to see things like this. We have to see it. We have to watch it. Our time at Terezin, the first concentration camp I had ever been to, left me feeling a deep sadness. The defenseless Jewish people, the innocent children, these that we are to love and protect, slaughtered. While this camp was bad, the place we were going to next was going to be even worse. While a plane would have gotten us to Auschwitz faster, we wanted to travel by train. Many Jewish people took not a luxury train, but they were in cattle cars. The same sounds, I think, the clanks of the rails, the shaking. They would leave the concentration camp at Terezin and have no idea what was happening. But they knew something bad was happening, the way they were transported and treated inhumanely. But I wanted to get a sense of what it would feel like to travel by rail, as the Germans would fill the rail cars, the cattle cars, with Jewish people from all over, bringing them eventually to these death camps as we're about to get to Auschwitz. The feelings, the emotions of this moment, I've been thinking as we traveled. I can see out the window and I can see the beautiful landscape, but they couldn't see out. It was dark, it was crowded, it was cramped. And just wondering what they thought, what were their emotions at that time. Many of them had been separated from their children. I think this is an important journey for Karen and I to be able to kind of think through these things and wonder what it must have been like for those Jewish people. Upon arriving at the train station near Auschwitz, I tried to imagine the horror that awaited the Jews here. Located in what was German-occupied Poland, Auschwitz was a complex of many camps. We first visited Auschwitz I, the main camp. Then we went to Auschwitz II, Birkenau. In less than 3 years, here, nearly 1 million Jews died. 865,000 were gassed upon arrival. It's hard to pull together my thoughts being in this place, the darkest place on the planet. This is Auschwitz, this is Birkenau, this is where the trains pulled in. The end of the line is just behind the camera. And out of these boxcars were thousands of people. Many of them marched right into the gas chambers and executed.
It was like a factory. It was gas chambers. And as I understand it, when they arrived in the cattle car, there was a doctor that ordered the Jewish people to form 2 lines. I believe it was a line on the right where the people, the women, the young children, that weren't any use as far as the Nazis were concerned. And on the other line, young people, young men primarily, who could work for the Nazis and perform functional work. And this line, the right row, went right into the gas chambers. And then the Nazis say, remove your clothes. And 20 minutes later, there was gas coming through the showers and they were dead. The corpses were cremated later on. And in the beginning, they had no idea what was happening to them. In the meantime, the other line, the young men primarily, they would work as long as they could. Many of them died from malnutrition, hunger, just like my father, and they were then cremated. It must have been just terrible.
What do you feel when you're standing here?
The reminder of how evil man can be, how the verse in Jeremiah says the heart is deceitful above all and desperately wicked. Just unbelievable, the things that they did to humans here, children, women. I thought it was interesting too, every prisoner when they came here, they were given a number tattooed on their arm, little children would receive the tattoo, and some of them would pass out from the pain of it. And they never called them by their name once they received that number. They were always called by that number just to make it easier for the guards to disengage that these were not humans. These were germs that needed to be killed.
Well, that's what Hitler called the Jewish people. He said germs. You have to eradicate germs. And so, people bought into that. And again, I think this all has to come back to demonism, because there's no way someone can just go down that road. People have tried to explain Hitler, why he was anti-Semitic, but really there's no explanation. There's no human reason why he hated them so much. And again, these are God's people. God said, they are my people. They're the apple of my eye. When you poke God in the eye, man, I'm telling you, what we need to do, instead of hating the Jews, we need to love the Jews. And then there's the story of Joseph.
Right.
Joseph was a young man. He was living a quiet life in a quiet Polish town. And he went to a torture camp, as he called it. And then he ended up here in Auschwitz.
And there was 1,000 other people from that town that were taken with him.
And when he arrived, they put a tattoo on his arm.
Yeah, and the numbers forever will be on his arm, 128164. And he said when he received those numbers, he felt like he lost his identity. He felt like he became
a number
instead of a person.
He eventually was transferred to Theresienstadt, which is interesting because they were sending them by the thousands here to be exterminated.
Right.
But he ended up there, and that's where he was liberated.
Right.
When he got back to his Polish village, his town, he said that there was only 10 people out of 1,000 that survived. Another Auschwitz story, her name is Susan. She was brought here with her family here to Auschwitz from Hungary on one of these cattle cars, stuffed in there. She said no hygiene, no food, no water. And in there for days and days, and many of the babies and the children on that car suffocated.
Because there were so many people in one car. And she said her mother, as soon as they arrived here, her mother was sent to the gas chambers, and she was healthy enough to be put to work. But it was in 1944, and that's right when the Allies were coming back in. And so the Germans quickly started marching them on a death march, is what they called it. And somehow she survived.
Yeah, and they were already in really bad conditions from starvation, and they're marching them to Germany, and she somehow made it. But many of them, if they would stop or sit down, they would shoot them.
And she said when the British came in and they saw her and they came to rescue her, she looked at them and thought of them as angels.
And that's what we want to do, especially after being here and seeing what happened to them. It just is bringing in my heart more and more compassion for the Jewish people. And I hope we can find ways to show our love, to show the love that Jesus has for me, the love that he is helping me have for others, but especially for the Jewish people. It's really hard to gather thoughts as you're standing in a place like this, a place so full of evil and hatred. I was once on an airplane heading to Israel, and there was a dentist who was Jewish who was also heading back to Israel where he lived. And we were talking and had a good conversation, and I said to him, I said, Lior, I said, you're proof to me that God exists. He says, why? I said, because for thousands of years, people have been trying to annihilate the Jewish people, try to kill the Jewish people, but yet here you are, you're still alive. You're still a people, and now they're back in the land. What a miracle. He looked at me and he said, Jim, that's why I don't believe in God. Because if there's a God, there's no way he would allow this. That's a hard question, isn't it? What do you say to that? The only thing I know is God loves you. He created you. He hates this type of stuff. He hates evil. He's going to make all things right one day. But Lior and Jim and all of us, we have to make a decision. Do we believe that God is good, that God is love, that he loves us so much that he sacrificed his own son to die for us? The Jews weren't responsible for the death of Christ. He gave his life willingly, I'm as responsible as anyone for his death because I'm a sinner. A lot of people like to stop and pick up a rock to remember a place like this. And this rail yard is full of little rocks like this. And I think this is a very apt description of sin. You and I all have sinned. Some sin far more than others, but all of us have sinned. We've all disobeyed. We've all rebelled against God. But Jesus had no sin. He was the perfect Son of God. He proved it in the fact that he had many predictions before he was even born. He fulfilled exactly. He lived that perfect life. They could not find any fault in him. So he died innocent for my sin and your sin. And when he died, he didn't stay dead. He rose again. And he says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. There is hope even here in Auschwitz. Here at InGrace, we love the Jewish people and Israel. When you support InGrace Ministries, together we can continue to tell their amazing story as God's earthly people. When you give to InGrace, let me thank you by sending you today's series about the Holocaust. And if you can give $40 or more, I'll send you all 4 of these impactful video series about Israel. I'm waiting to hear from you right now.
Call 800-78-GRACE or go online to InGrace.tv and receive this special offer. The number is 800-78-GRACE or visit InGrace.tv. Tune in next week for part 4 of The Deepest Evil. The survival of a boy and a people during the Holocaust.
All Hitler was trying to do was apply what academia as a whole had been teaching for a number of years, applying Darwinism to society, reducing the breeding with inferior races, the Jews, Slavics, and so on, and trying to uplift the German population, the German breed, and that's the term they used.
Record every single InGrace episode. You will be so blessed as we learn all about God's world and God's Word. InGrace is a viewer-supported ministry. Thank you for your prayers and gifts.